Okay.
All right, welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm your host, Richard Restuccia, and today we're going to be talking about vinyl tubing. And, a lot of people, when they heard this, wrote me, and a few even called me and said, what's the big deal about vinyl tubing? And I said, I might have thought that too, until I started to really look at vinyl tubing. What's the difference between poly tubing and vinyl? And specifically, what applications are better for using each. And very quickly, I realized that if I was using vinyl tubing when I should be using poly, I was going to have a problem, and vice versa. But I think oftentimes people, and I do this too, right, take a sample to the store and say, give me some more of this. And if you don't know what it is, you might not come back with the right product, or you might send somebody to do that and they might not come back with the right product. So today, we've got Michael Derwenko taking us through this education on vinyl tubing, specifically because it's pretty popular in the indoor growing industry. And, that's Michael's area of expertise. Now, Michael's just not an expert on indoor growing, but Michael's got a really unique and valuable background. He's worked as a landscape contractor. He's worked customer service phones for and troubleshooting for major manufacturer. He's worked at Jane now almost 8 years and has been really active in both landscape and indoor growing parts of the business, and is well known right now in the industry for really helping people get their irrigation set up correctly. So anyway, we're really happy to have Michael with us today. Michael, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great points. Yeah, the vinyl, I think it's people are familiar with it, but they just don't really know the details behind it. So hopefully we can review that.
Yeah, so Michael, are people using a lot of vinyl tubing these days in irrigation?
On the landscape side, a lot of the major distributors like Home Depot and Lowe's, they're still selling vinyl. I would have to guess it's because it's more prevalent and it's cheaper, the higher margins. The use of it is very much overused. Most home gardeners are using it, and then they're just buying more and replacing it, buying more and replacing it. It's just not the right tool for the job. I think there's a reason that they're having to replace it. And so I do think there are people using it, but I think most of the time they shouldn't be using it. I know when I started at Jane, I didn't really know the difference between poly and vinyl. I know I liked the flexibility of vinyl when you're snaking it around stuff, but I did always question why it would always pop off the barbs after a few months, and I would think it was the use, but it ends up just being, what we're going to review with the getting bigger and smaller. And so I do think a lot of people are using it, and hopefully not only the indoor growers, but the landscapers will see what we're talking about. So they're using it and looking for more long-term solutions as opposed to just constantly replacing vinyl.
Yeah, I had the same experience myself, right? The vinyl tubing, oh, so soft and nice. And then you've got the poly tubing that's hard, right? It feels more rigid. And you start to think the poly is just old vinyl that got hard, but it's not. And but there are some real advantages in certain areas for the vinyl. And that's what we're excited to hear about today.
Yeah, there are. And exactly. Yeah, when it comes to snaking it, it does seem more difficult, but I usually say when in doubt, a tip, I always cut longer than you think you're going to need. If you think you need 12 inches, cut 24 inches, and just be prepared to snake it. If you do that, that solves the problem. Most people in their gardens, when they're buying vinyl from Home Depot, they're cutting little sections or they're using it for 20 feet. And so there's a happy medium there. And I always say err on the side of longer then shorter, and then you can always curl it if you need to.
Yeah. So Michael, I also want to remind everybody out there, I've got the Q&A open as well as the chat. So if you have a question or you have a comment today, put it in and I'll go ahead and ask Michael when it's appropriate. And we have been giving Jane hats and Jane t-shirts to those people who've been asking great questions. So thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so a couple of things we wanted to discuss today. We could talk about tubing for a long time. Obviously, Jane, we're very good at this. There's an efficiency to it. And what we did with the indoor grow team and on the landscape side, we're trying to inform contractors when not to use vinyl and when to use poly. And then on the indoor grow side, the same thing is true. If we're growing outside and we're growing hemp, We definitely want to be using poly. If we're growing inside, then UV isn't necessarily as bad. Usually it's protected by the canopy, and we do like the flexibility of it, which is a big one, especially when you start going to the larger ID and OD, or essentially diameters. We want to go to a vinyl for the flexibility. Poly indoors can be very hard to snake through different conduits and sweeps. So most of the time we're going to use vinyl for that. So we're going to cover a couple things today. I did want to start with the extrusion process. This is kind of review for anyone that's seen some of our tubing and polyethylene webinars, but then a lot of people don't know how we even make tubing, and it's pretty fascinating. And I think it kind of explains why we can make an easy product development pivot from poly to vinyl and still provide quality products at a great price, which is really what we try to drive home at Jane. And so we'll review some of the differences in vinyl and poly. Some of the benefits for the indoor growers and when you can use it. You can use it in a lot of different places. And once your personnel, your team becomes familiar with it, it's very easy for them to say, do you have this in a larger diameter, smaller diameter, with the same product consistency? So that's a big one for an educational level. Also, Prop 65 compliance is a big deal in California. Most manufacturers are making landscape products. If you look in the back of their catalog, there's a very big warranty disclaimer that says this is not meant for agriculture. And Prop 65 compliance kind of tries to tackle that. They want to make sure that whatever water you're putting through this tubing is either going to be inhaled, or put into a pill form, ultimately for an edible. So all of that is rated under the 65 compliance. And so we'll review a little bit about that, and then we'll tell you where you can buy it and some of the key partners that Jane has teamed up with over the years to distribute it.
Okay, great.
So going right into the extrusion process, as I said, this is a little bit of a review, but some of the things that the way that I explain it when I give tours of our facility, or when most of our product managers do, it's relatively simple when you look at the linear process of it. We're taking pellets that are made the same as our poly, just a different material, and those are melted down. They're melted down with a compression. Kind of compression device, I'll say. And then as the tubing is extruded, if you just took candle wax and tried to wrap it, it would just become a big clump. And so we cool it. So we have about 60 feet of very cool water to cool it down before it's coiled. So the same way that poly's made, vinyl's made very similar. There are some slight temperature differences in when we make it. We do have to make it a little slower because of the density of the walls most of the time. So that's one of the reasons we probably don't stock as much of it, but we can make very many sizes. And it's, as I mentioned before, there's an efficiency to our extrusion process that carries over from poly to vinyl. And so we really want to, lead the industry, make indoor growers feel comfortable at all levels of tubing and fittings going with Jane.
So Michael, we have our first question coming in, and somebody wants to know, how do I know I'm actually buying vinyl tubing? Will it say, this is vinyl tubing? I think we're looking at a label right now, and I can't read everything on that label, but does it say vinyl? Or how do I let my dealer, my distributor, my retailer know I want vinyl?
So traditionally on the landscape side, the Home Depot, the Lowe's, the Site Ones, the vinyl that we're coming in contact as contractors has like a matte finish to it. And then it definitely, you can squeeze it as a flexibility. If you can touch one inner wall to the other inner wall, it's typically vinyl. It's very flimsy. You can stretch it way easier. When it comes to poly is going to have a sheen to it, at the small sizes. So when you're dealing with 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch supply tubing on the landscape side, you're going to be looking for that sheen. It's going to have it's not going to be as kink resistant. And you're not going to be able to squeeze it as easily. So that lack of pliability creates frustration for some landscape contractors. But if you're stapling it down properly, you're cutting it to proper lengths, the poly is preferred at all times. But typically on the smaller diameter supply tubing, you're going to know the difference because that matte, there's like a friction to it when you rub your fingers across it. Poly is going to be a glossy finish on the landscape side. Now on the grow side, same thing, you're gonna have a little bit of a sheen in the larger diameter polys. Like our white tubing has a sheen to it because of some additives we put in it for UV. But you're not nearly going to have the sheen you do with indoor vinyl. And our vinyl on the indoor grow side has a very heavy sheen because it's made with a very high quality vinyl resin to make sure that, you know, it's a superior product, which is why we've partnered with who we've partnered with.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That
But
helps.
nothing, they're not going to mention on the label. I think actually on our 1/4 inch stuff, we say vinyl tubing and poly because we make both. But traditionally, most of the major manufacturers are making vinyl tubing. They're using vinyl tubing. I know inside of golf rotors, they'll use some poly because they need a higher quality product. But most of the time, you're seeing just the matte finish vinyl.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So some differences between the two, as I just mentioned. Here's some specs. So if you're not on this webinar, you could always reference these slides later. And this shows there are some similarities. A lot of the coil sizes are very similar, which helps us in the efficiency of the process of coiling them. A lot of the connection types are very similar. So contractors that are converting from an outdoor installation to an indoor should feel very familiar. The biggest thing is going to be the flexibility. And what happens is, and I'll get to it in a second, but when we have smaller areas, typically in landscapes, we're dealing with bigger, expansive areas. When we get into smaller, narrower rooms, and then we have narrower benches, and then we have overhead lights, and then you've got heights, and then you've got canopies, you've got to have access, sliding benches. Flexibility is everything, and not just because of length, but because you're constantly trying to work in small spaces. You're either displacing the water or you're irrigating the plants, and in doing both of those, bringing the water in and out of the room, that flexibility is huge. Slip and falls are a huge liability with indoor growers. And so the flexibility of vinyl allows us to snake into sweeps into the ground, come up under the benches, and then go back to the valves so you can walk over without tripping over it. And so also vinyl gets very heavy when it has water in it because it is a thicker wall. So ideally, it's that flexibility allows us to run into conduits, which helps and gives you a cleaner application.
Yeah, wow, certainly it would help too with labor on elbows and trying to snake around with different fittings. And then does that make it safer as far as leaks and issues like that?
Yeah, and so different connection types. On the poly, we're used to, typically poly is regulated to lower pressures. So a simple barbed fitting, double barbed fitting will hold it on. There's no clamps needed. Sometimes with a larger diameter, poly, you're running so much water through it, it requires more pressure or energy to move that water. So you're going to want to use something that's either locking or has a clamp of some sort. Typically, you don't see poly bigger than about 1.25 inches. Anything past that, your friction loss is going to throw some of your hydraulics off. It really doesn't make sense not to use rigid PVC at those kind of flow rates. And the same is true with vinyl tubing. You shouldn't be running 1.25 inch vinyl tubing 300 feet. It's not used for long expansive runs. It's used for a lot of the manifold systems, the nutrients, the reservoirs, and then ultimately the smaller diameter tubing is used to go into the plant. So those are some of the similarities. And as you can see, some of the differences are pretty simple. We make vinyl in very many sizes. I think it's 14 different sizes. So any kind of tubing you should need, clear, blue, black, we make them all. And we kind of advertise to use our barbed fittings with a collar and a clamp. For the larger stuff, the smaller stuff doesn't need a clamp on it. It's low pressure.
Right. And somebody's making the comment that they love the vinyl in the small diameters because it's so much easier to put on the fittings and saves their hands after a day of pushing on tubing onto small fittings.
And I think that's what the case is with gardeners and homeowners. Is it is easier to put on. The poly requires a little more strength, but once it's on, it shouldn't be a problem. In this case right here, in this image, you can see that's standard vinyl. So that would be like landscape vinyl. That's what you're going to see at Home Depot and at the stores. This was before we were making the full indoor grow vinyl with the UV in it. And so you can see it kind of has a matte finish. It's not as sheeny as the new stuff we make, which is the compliant stuff. So, and remember, Prop 65 compliance is California. This was an Ohio project. they've got different standards of compliance. And so since then, they've actually switched it all out to our better vinyl, but this gives you some idea. And it also gives you a little idea of how much vinyl is used in a project. This is not something that that goes by the wayside. This is something that needs to be taken into account, because you're going to buy a lot of it, and your personnel is going to be coming in contact with it almost more than any other component of your irrigation system. So,
yeah. So, Mike, on this photo right here, the right-hand side's a little faded out, but it looks like they've got the stakes on the end of the tubing there. Do these on the left, are they just waiting to get stakes, or do you sometimes not use the stakes?
We typically don't push the stakes on until we're done flushing the table. And so in this case, those probably still need to be flushed. And then once they're flushed, they'll put the stakes on. I think on this particular project, those aren't even stakes; those are just staples that are holding them. But that would be the precedent would be flush your lines before you put the arrow or barbed angled stake in the end of it. And then in this case, what they'll do is growers will cut it. They get an assembly line going, and they cut them all to 3 feet, and then they'll end up cutting them shorter or leaving them that long. But what they're doing is they're trying to make sure the leads go all the way across the table. Worst case scenario, the plant's on the other side. And then a lot of times they're going to run 2 of these tubes to one plant, maybe a bigger mother plant. So they need that, and then it allows them to snake it, and then it allows them to remove it during yields, just drop them on the floor. And then they can access the whole bench and the plants all the way across without having to get the irrigation get in your way. These ones are also on, breakaway valves or unions on the ends of the line, so you can just disconnect it. That whole thing can just be set on the floor. You can pull your bench towards you and have complete access, and the irrigation's out of the way. That kind of flexibility is huge when all your tubes, aren't trying to shoot everywhere. So
right, yeah, wow, what a first-class setup. That looks really great. I love that that photo.
Yeah, and the same is true with our, if you don't need 8 ports of water coming off, the same vinyl can be used to come off of a single point source emitter, break into 2 points or break into 4 points. So depending on your plant count, your plant size, your table width, there's a solution for all of these things and all of these setups, and there's only 4 or 5 different options. So it does make it pretty easy and self-explanatory.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
A couple other things along with flexibility. As we mentioned, the expansion and contraction is huge. When the plants are smaller, they don't have that protective canopy from those intense lights. A nice operation is going to be slowly moving the lights up as the canopy grows. So with a 20-hour light cycle or 22-hour light cycle, sometimes the vinyl is getting beat down with a lot of UV. And it is more protected as the plant grows over its 65, 70-day process. But initially it isn't. And a lot of growers, when they have smaller diameter tubing popping off of barbs, it's either too much pressure or an inferior version of vinyl, coming off. And so you've got to use the high quality vinyl or use a poly to make sure that doesn't happen. Because if you have a blowout inside, it can be catastrophic. And so that's just what I mean when I mean expansion and contraction. And then in between those light cycles, you got HVAC and fans moving air out of there, moving humidity out of there. It's dropping the temperature 20 degrees before the lights come back on. And so that vinyl is having to deal with a lot. You want to go with a higher quality to eliminate some of the problems you may have. That's true with outside too for my landscape contractors. Try to use polyethylene outside with the UV protectants in it, and you won't have the pop-off problems on the smaller diameter tubing. That's true with the last point as well.
Yeah, that's a great example on both those of the importance of quality of the tubing.
Yeah, and I think we've come a long way on the manufacturing side and the quality side, just in our market or in our industry. In the mid 90s, late 90s, when I started doing irrigation, everything was very low quality vinyl. It was very flexible, but it did not stay on anything more than a couple of months, especially in the Florida heat. And so I wish I would have known about poly back then for outdoor and vinyl for indoor. Yeah. So a couple more benefits that I wanted to list. These are when I'm working with growers on installations. These are some of the benefits that I've seen that have solved some either labor issues, some ultimately some time sucking issues that happens with your teams. And then have also led to better design, where maybe I didn't even know that this was possible before, as this, this industry is still kind of innovating itself, which is super fascinating. You got to learn from your mistakes. And so a lot of times what you're seeing is not what you've seen in the past. We're learning with every project that comes along. And the application of vinyl at all those different sizes you saw is getting more and more prevalent. And so now when I'm working with growers, I'm not just trying to market, 1/4 inch vinyl to them. I'm trying to market vinyl all the way up to inch and a quarter. So maybe on the nutrient side, we're using, 5/8 inch. And then on the supply side, we're using inch and a quarter. And then on the secondary side, we're using 1/4 inch. And so there, you may need a lot of vinyl. A lot of the RO machines also have a lot of vinyl tubing on them for replacing, for maintenance. So all of our vinyl works with those machines as well, and water cooling systems. So there's always different applications. And in this one in particular, the reason I use these two photos is on the left you can see on the secondary side they're using 3/4 inch vinyl with clamps and with kind of union breakaways for maintenance and flushing. And those go into the ground, into basically drainage sweeps, and then they come up under the table. That way there's no trip and fall around the whole, around all the tables. So everything's completely protected. That'd be very difficult to do with PVC. And you wouldn't want to do it with poly for some of the reasons we just mentioned. And so I always kind of show contractors and growers that assembly right there. I think that is not overkill. I think it's exactly what you need. I think you need shutoff valves, unions on the primary side, breakaways on the secondary side. Obviously, you need filters. In this case, I do understand they're filtering before the valve. That was a grower decision. Typically we filter after the valve. I would love to hear the arguments against each. One makes you think you're protecting the valve more, but sometimes, but then the filter might be coming in more contact with debris than it normally would. And then not to mention, if you don't have ball valves, the line's going to be charged. You can't maintenance the filter. But if you have a ball valve installed properly, you could maintenance the filter here. So there's a couple little tweaks here. And then on the right side, you can see how the vinyl, we're able to snake it up into the plant to make sure that it drips right to the root source.
Yeah, it's really cool, especially this photo on the left, bottom left-hand corner. You see this 3/4 inch tubing is so flexible. You don't need an elbow at the bottom to make that right angle. It just kind of bends just fine and allows free flow of water. And same thing with the pots. No extra elbows needed. Everything goes in there very easily. I like that.
Yeah, and on the right side, as I mentioned, if you don't need octobubblers, because you don't need that many points of connection. There's single, two-way, and four-way manifolds. The tubing would go right down the middle of the table, and the same thing would occur. And that's a very popular application with growers, is to come straight off of the point source emitter with the vinyl. And you can do that as well. You have to move the tubing out of the way when you do your yields and you maintenance your plants. It is a little bit more of an economical way. But remember, more points of connection, more points of filtration mean more points of maintenance, which ultimately leads to more personnel time to manage these things. So the upsell to the octobubbler is now you have a single point of maintenance for 8 different points of connection, as opposed to 8, 4, or 2. So it's just, the whole idea is you're trying to eliminate these areas that are going to take up too much time for personnel to maintenance.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of things, we do have some growers will use different colors of the vinyl depending on, maybe if it's your RO machine, you're using clear. If it's for your nutrients, you can use blue. And then your secondary side application is going to be black. So there's some different colors you can mix and match. Drainage reservoirs, when you have big tanks, sometimes running PVC into them and out of them can be troublesome. So the vinyl gives you that flexibility to maybe allow a filter or an intake valve to sit in the basin of the tank a little easier because of that. And then dosatron, Maisie, all the big nutrient injection devices, it's way easier to come off of them and go into a jug that you're constantly going to be replacing with a flexible tubing as opposed to a rigid PVC. So just like a garden hose, it kind of gives you a little bit of added flexibility. And you know that if it's being dunked in a 50 gallons of compost tea, that it's not going to be eaten away. It's going to be resilient. So moving on, the technical side of it for our California growers, Prop 65 compliance is big. I know there's a lot of ambulance chasing lawyers on the West Coast that are going after a lot of dispensaries and growers that don't have Prop 65 compliance. They do it in the tomato industry. They do it in other ag industries. It's only a matter of time before they start looking for that revenue stream to tap into going after this. It's a very easy decision to go after Prop 65 tubing. You're not, it's available out there. I would have said 10 years ago is a little harder to find. Now for our growers, it was typically used at food grade, at dairy and very much higher end markets. But with our market being as valuable as it is now, a lot of people are really looking for that tag and certification on there. We're one of the only companies that I know that makes Prop 65 compliant, or at least stands behind the compliance. We've had our tubing rated for this. And so, we feel comfortable saying that, you're not going to get in trouble if you use it. If you have any questions about it, you can always ask us. And then I also just wanted to include basically the definition that the state gives for 65 compliance. And it seems pretty obvious why you'd want, anything you can't drink through. I don't know why you'd want to be watering something that you're going to eat. And so while it seems easy to us, all that tubing at Home Depot and Lowe's that you were asking about, none of that is compliant, and people are feeding their tomatoes every day with it. So, you could argue maybe there's not any problems there, but when it comes to this, I think it's just one easy checkbox for growers and contractors to check to reduce liability and feel a little more comfortable with their grow operations.
Sure. Talk about a really inexpensive peace of mind here. No reason not to use it.
Yeah, the same is true with food grade. Anyone that's seen the Coca-Cola fountain machines, a lot of that vinyl has kind of like a braided inseam to it. That's typically to get away from the better quality resins. It's a kind of a cheaper, it's more expensive of a process, but a cheaper quality. So I think that's the reason they use it so often. Our vinyl doesn't need that inseam. So if you see our clear tubing and it doesn't have that mesh inseam, it shouldn't need that. That shouldn't be an issue. It's just a lot of it is just IDing, and it's just a different market. So that should be an issue all, but the flexibility is identical.
Yeah. Interesting point though about that. And funny that you point out the beverage machines, because I see those and I didn't think about that, right?
Well, I mean, you're at the pet store and you see fish tanks. A lot of our distributors sell pond supplies. A lot of the pond stuff is vinyl. You're not drinking through it, so you don't need the compliance. So maybe the price point's not there. But for any garden application or any high volume grow, when a plant costs $2,500 to $5,000, you want to make sure that it's getting watered with the best tubing possible. For this price, there should be no reason you're not using it. And as you can see in the bottom left, our vinyl is made in Fresno, California. Our resin is sourced domestically. So it's a very tight weaved internal process of quality that we use, just like we do with our poly. And you can see those pallets after pallets of the tubing and the tape we make. So we have a very efficient quality process. We have very high standards of quality control in Fresno. And that doesn't just apply to our poly, it definitely applies to our vinyl. How we package it, how we ship it, how we stand behind it, how we market it and promote it, all these things. As I started to transition into this market about 2 or 3 years ago, this was one of the first opportunities I saw for growers and distributors and retailers, was instead of letting that tubing collect dust at the back or constantly putting it up there and letting your growers cut it by the foot, this should be something that's front and center, because basically everything pivots off of this product. And if you can teach your team how to sell this product properly, everything else will fall into place. So it really is a key product to that market. And I don't think it's kind of getting the attention it should. And so we really want to work on that. I know we are personally. So.
Yeah, great points, Michael, and so true, right? This is the backbone of your system. You should use the best.
Yeah, and we try to lead the market in the extrusion side in landscape and ag, and we've been making this vinyl for years now for some of our preferred partners like Hawthorne, and we've sold millions of feet, and they've sold millions of feet, and there's millions of feet out there. Most hydroponic shops I walk into across the country have HydroFlow tubing, which is a tubing that Hawthorne's partnered with us for years on, because of the quality. We provide the quality, the compliance is there. And then they have the distribution network to get it out there and get the word out there. So they've been a great partner over the years. And then retailers, like I said, you should be able to walk into an over-the-counter retailer hydroponic shop, and they're going to have some version of vinyl in there. Anytime you see the HydroFlow label or Jane label, you want to try to move in that direction. There's competition out there for vinyl. Usually if the price is way cheaper, there's a reason, or if it's green or some fancy color, that's what you're paying for. The price of the color of the resin is a lot of time based on the price. White costs more than black, green costs more than white. So if you really think you're getting a better product because it's more expensive, you're not. You're paying more for a different color product. And as we've talked for half an hour, I've brought a color one time. So color of your product should not be a priority. It should be the quality of the resin going into it, and then the support network afterwards. So just have some idea of what you're paying for, and if you ever question it, send me a photo, and I would love to have that discussion.
Yeah, good point. So we get another question coming in, and it has to do with where do I buy this? Do I have to go to a retailer? Are there people selling it online? What's the best way?
So over the past few years, we had a very proprietary network of distribution with Hawthorne and HydroFlow. It's really hard to get to everybody in the country through a single distributor. We're constantly, they're our top priority. We're offering them support. But if you're not, Hawthorne is a B2B customer. So if you're not a customer of theirs, the last thing we want is a grower going to an inferior product because maybe they don't have that direct distribution network. So between the two of us, there should be no reason you couldn't go through Jane, talk to any of your TSMs out there. We have enough stock that we could get you whatever you want, but ideally we're looking for larger operations to sell in mass where there's an efficiency to it. But you'd be surprised how much we do inventory. And then ultimately, you can always go into a hydroponic store and request it. Say, hey, do you have HydroFlow tubing? I bought your tubing in the past and it blows off of the fittings constantly, or it loses its sheen, or you just need more, and ask for that name. There is name recognition on the HydroFlow side with a lot of the larger customers. And then there's also some with the smaller retailers, because I think we've done pretty good about providing support through social media and our sales force.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for answering that question.
I will say, in doing research on vinyl in the last couple of years, a lot of vinyl comes from overseas. A lot of it comes from Asia. A lot of it is distributed and networked through Canada. It goes into Canada and then comes down here. I'm not 100% sure why they would want to ship to Canada and then to America. It sounds a little shady, but I do want people to be wary that inferior quality vinyl it's a high liability, and if it's coming on a ship that takes 3 months to get here to go to another foreign source to be distributed down here, you're paying for that. Every time that tubing stops, you're paying for that. And so you might see the price and say, well, this one's the same price, but when you source it, you're going to find out the reason it's the same price is because the resin is 50% of the quality of the tubing you could potentially get in America. So if you're using a lot of any kind of tubing, poly or vinyl, I always would try to source it to even a minimal degree, even if it means asking the counter guy, hey, who makes this? Where does it come from? Do you know anything about it? And more often than not, they'll be intrigued as well. They'll reach out to one of us and we can tell them. But a lot of it does come from Korea, Taiwan, goes into Canada, and is distributed down to America. And there's just no reason to be two-stepping that when we make it in Fresno, California. And so I think we're a great opportunity for the market and for any customer that needs it.
Yeah, and I think the other point, Michael, I think I understand this correctly, is we're not talking dollars a foot difference. We're talking pennies a foot difference.
Yeah, I mean, we joked earlier this week when I went into a pet store and they were selling 8 feet for $6. Our list price on 100 feet is about $15, $16, maybe $20. So it shows you the difference. So you can get a better quality tubing and more of it. So any aquarium owners out there, you can jump on our website or Hawthorne's website and buy a coil of it. And you're stocked up for a couple of years. So you will see vinyl everywhere. I know when I'm on planes, I'm constantly looking at the hoses and the IPS and the tubing. I'm looking at any tubing that's made possible, and I'm driving Fresno crazy. Can we make this? Can we make this? So we're very fortunate that we're able to produce this much vinyl, this high quality, and this many types of it for this potential market, pond market, aquarium market, whoever you are, feel free to reach out. We have this resource.
Yeah, a lot bigger than just irrigation.
Yeah, for sure. So that was all I had today. Like I said, we could talk about tubing forever. If there's any more questions, let me know. This is my email. I'm on Twitter. I manage the Instagram account, so you'll see most of it is indoor grow. We have some landscape, some ag, but the main reason we started that account was for our indoor growers and our hemp and cannabis growers, to really just be a resource for them from a manufacturing side. So you can always email me with any questions you have. We can always send you samples. You can always try it out. But I think if you hold it up against the competitions or what you're finding at the store, you'll quickly see that it's a superior product.
Yeah. Well, listen, great job today, Michael. I know I've come away learning and knowing now a lot more about vinyl tubing and the proper application. So thank you for that. And then thank you for making yourself available to anyone who's watching. I know you're sincere in your offer, and it's a passion of yours. So I know you want to talk about it. So thank you for that. Thank you to all of you who tuned in today to watch. Remember, we've got more than 200 trainings on the Janes USA website today for you to watch for free. And anywhere you want to listen to your favorite podcast, or where you listen to your favorite podcast, you can find us on there as well. I love this concept of people working and learning at the same time, educating yourself while you're at work. I love it. Let's keep that going. Again, Michael, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time today. And we're going to be back on Friday talking with Andy Bellingary about the different emission devices that you might need to use in your landscapes and in your garden. So very informative on Friday too. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of the day. We'll talk to you soon.